this will be one for the history books.
Okay. So thanks for taking,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, thanks for taking time to be with us on this. Is it Thursday? What month is it? It's Thursday, May 28th. It's almost June. It's almost summer, and it's beautiful. It's warm, and we're here talking about life, about COVID-19 realities, about whatever we kind of get into over the next 30 to 45 minutes. And I'm just grateful that you have carved out time in your surely busy schedule to be with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And just before we get started, I wanted to say a few things. One, I'm more than happy to do these with any group or any community if it's helpful. I appreciate you sharing it live on social media. That way, the bigger community can be a part of this discussion if they like. So I just want to offer that to anyone that's interested, and also say that I'm not an expert on COVID, and I don't think actually almost anybody is. There's people that definitely know a lot more than I do. And so I just want to make that clear. I'll do the best I can to answer questions about COVID. And if there's things I'm not clear about, I'll write down your questions and get back to you so I can make sure you get the most accurate information.
Okay, awesome. I'm just commenting on Facebook to leave your questions here if you have questions.
Okay, good. Okay, and so you're going to monitor that?
Yeah, I'll monitor that, and I'll be like the DJ, the MC.
Okay, great.
All right.
I noticed there were some, maybe on your post on Instagram, some questions there. One, I think, was about folks that are living unsheltered and also are elderly. I think that was one question, if I'm remembering right, and then you might remember the other question. I think there was two.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you want to just get started on questions or if you wanted to have like a bigger.
How about let's start with a big one and then we'll drill down. So
sure.
First, because I think it's important for people who are watching this to get to know Miss Heidi Harmon, the person, and outside of the mayor. And I don't know if it's hard for you to it's not. You're the same person both places. You're mayor and also mom and also individual. And so would you kind of share with us like what's been like maybe one of the hardest things about this season for you as kind of being in a position of leadership? We know sometimes it's lonely at the top to lead. And I know you've got an army of people around you with city council, but what's been one of the hardest things for you? We've been in pandemic sheltering at home now for I think like 60, 70 days now. And so that's kind of crazy. So how's that been for you and what's been difficult?
I think the most difficult thing in the context of this moment, first of all, I think COVID has really amplified pretty much every pre-existing condition there has been. Health conditions, structural inequality conditions, and I think one of the number one challenges that we face as a country is the division that we are a part of and experiencing. And I think that that's been one of the hardest things, that it feels like COVID has sort of really amplified the divisiveness that had already been blooming.
Yeah.
And it's made it incredibly difficult to traverse. And it's honestly, I feel like, what facts do I
trust?
Right. Yes, because there's the kind of official narrative of what's happening. There's a lot of what might be called alternative narratives about what's happening. People have a lot of suspicion of media, of government, and rightfully so. Like I completely understand that. And so that's been, I think, the hardest thing is to really know how to make sense of what's going on. That's something that I am very intellectually curious about, is sense making. Like what mechanism do we use to make sense of things? And so I think in the context of this, that division and that lack of clarity has been difficult. And it's also been hard to, especially in the first weeks and month, maybe, just the amount of correspondence was epic. And obviously people's fear was huge. And so just trying to stay connected and help people as much as I can, and also want to empower people to be able to know how to help themselves. So it's trying to strike that balance of caretaking and doing what is mine to do, and also wanting to make sure that the community feels empowered to, on some level where appropriate, help themselves. So those have been some of the main challenges, I would say.
Yeah. Has it been difficult for you in this season? Because, everything changes. If we're backing up almost 70 days ago when all of this is kind of unraveling, the news is changing rapidly. We hit national declaration of emergency. I don't know if I said that right. And then all these things happen really quickly, and you're kind of you're in emergency mode.
Mm-hmm.
You found it hard as a leader to balance work and rest and self-care and, because I think you said early, this has amplified everybody's pre-existing conditions. And so if I had a little fear, it's amplified. If I had a little anxiety, it's amplified. If I had a little, workaholism, it's amplified, how have you navigated that as a leader?
Mm-hmm.
I think I would love to know. Asking for a
Well,
friend.
well, I've been trying to take really good care of myself. And like, for example, I was just working out before we got on this call. I tried to fit in a little workout, and that was a mistake. I can see because I'm still sweating from that. So I've been trying to take really good care of my own health, and also, and as an aspect of that, my energy, to make sure that I have enough energy to do what I feel called to do. Workaholism, when you said that, that resonates for me. I feel vaguely obsessed with helping people, but also learning, trying to figure out what is actually going on and what I can do about it. But I think all those basics of basic health are always so key. And I think that COVID's really lifted up health and really made it clear how important that is. And so for those of us, self-care on many levels is a privilege, right? Like to have the time and the energy to eat healthy, then the resources to eat healthy and to get a good night's sleep. And all of those things, I feel lucky to have that privilege. And so I try my best to take as good a care of myself as I can. While for me, and I think I'm sure for you too, like self-care has aspects of escapism in it too. And so I think ultimately when we're talking about self-care, what I'm also really interested in is being part of creating a world from which none of us have to escape in the
Right.
first place.
Right.
So yes, taking care of ourselves in order to have the energy to basically create a more fair and just world is kind of how I treat that topic of self-care.
Yeah, well, let's talk about, because that's a launching pad for a question that we had, and I want to make sure I read it correctly. We received a message yesterday, and we received a message yesterday, if I can read it to you, just about everything that's happening in our world in terms of justice, fairness, injustice. We're seeing a lot in the past month. We've seen a lot of maybe racial injustice or inequality. One question that someone asked on Facebook was, how do you feel as mayor, the church, or maybe I'll even expand that to city, church, even individuals should respond to the racial injustices taking place? And you can answer that from a church perspective. Like, how do you think the role of the church is in dealing with racial injustice, maybe the city and even personally?
Man, I mean, it is such an important and big topic. And I've been thinking a lot about it. And I feel, what's the word? I feel some lack of clarity on what is most helpful.
Mhm.
Because I've noticed that there's a lot of different thinking about what is most helpful.
Mhm.
So, for example, silence, I recognize, is, I think, clearly accepted and regarded as the least helpful
Right.
thing. So I understand that. Then I've noticed, like over the course of the past week in the social media space, folks posting about some of the things that have happened, then being asked to take those down because it's not their place to post that, or it's re-traumatizing to post. And so I'm trying to learn and be thoughtful and reflective about what is actually most helpful, not just what makes me look or feel good or look or feel like I'm helping, but I'm actually not only not helping, but in some cases potentially accidentally and inadvertently causing harm, but that inadvertent harm is still harm.
Yeah.
So I am trying to figure that out for myself in the context that I'm in this community.
Yeah.
Um, I have reached out to some of the folks that run Race Matters in the hopes that we can have a bigger community conversation
Yeah.
to have them lead the answer to the question that you're asking.
Yeah.
But I do think donating to our local community groups that are engaging on trying to be part of the solutions to some of these injustices is a very key and beginning thing that we can do. So Race Matters, the SLO County NAACP, and a lot of other groups along that line, I think that would be really helpful. But, churches obviously have traditionally been key in social movements in general. I think, I have a couple years ago reached out to a lot of the faith leaders in our community, recognizing two things. One, I hadn't been hearing from folks from a faith perspective. And so I wanted to make sure that people didn't feel inadvertently shut out in some way. And I wanted people to know that they were absolutely invited and included to be part of the table of conversations that we're having. And also, I'm really interested in solving a lot of these problems, and faith communities are huge in that. And so I think that, having a truly what I would consider, a really sort of Christian perspective of love thy neighbor, and standing up for folks, even and especially when it's hard, are some beginning steps.
Yeah.
I think one of the hardest things that we have to do is talk to our own people, so to speak, when like our own family members or community members, to have the courage to just help them, to call them up,
Yeah.
or call them out, but hopefully call them up. Like I was thinking about my own parents who have at times said things that, you just kind of go, and they're great people, right? And there's this piece that happens sometimes, like with a lot of our elders in our families, for, it's kind of typical. There's a generational shift that happens, and to be able to have the courage to call those people up, and
Yeah.
in those small ways too, I think we can make a bigger difference too.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier, what you said about how the church has usually been a source, I don't know how you worded it, of social change, and
Mm-hmm.
I think, or social action. But you also kind of hinted the church has also been known for social inaction, for maybe silence, of kind of isolating itself and not being willing to be in the middle of uncomfortable conversations. And I think that's something that I'm learning as a white man, in San Luis Obispo, that I have a lot to learn. And if I'm willing to admit that and acknowledge that and step into hard conversations, where I'm not always confident, I walk with a lot of privilege, and to be willing to listen and to be willing to hurt. One thing I love about Jesus is that he stepped into the situation of those around him. He stepped into their shoes and felt what they felt and saw how they saw, and and tried to meet them in the middle of that. And I think for us as a culture, as a church, specifically as a church leader, and to be willing to step into those conversations and say, not just tell me how you feel and put the responsibility on others, but to take the responsibility on myself and to be willing to be challenged, to step in and to step out. I think you're right though. Like my wife and I were talking about that, just like everybody feels like we need to rush to post something, but then is that it? That's not it. That's not the end of this. That doesn't move the needle. It's got to be more. It's got to be more than that. And so we've got a lot to learn. I appreciate your perspective on that big time. So
Yeah, and one of the books I highly recommend folks read is White Fragility. She's a great author. She came to Cal Poly last year. It was a really profound, I felt like, opportunity to get in touch with a lot of those things that you're talking about, that discomfort, and being ready and challenging ourselves to let go of being the good guy, right? Like we want to be one of the good racists, basically. Like if we're in a racist culture we're all participating in it, even if we're not intentionally or consciously doing that. And so we just have to know that, and know, like you're saying, we're going to make mistakes, and it's going to be painful, and we might accidentally cause harm, and that being called out on that is also painful. Like, it's all hard,
The
and
risk,
it's and
the
we
risk
still
is
have to
worth
do
it
it.
though. The risk of
Yeah.
speaking up is worth it. You know, because to be silent, right, is to choose to be ignorant. You know, and I think we should desire to know. I appreciate your perspective on that big time.
It's complicity. I was listening to a Black author today say, he was answering the question, what should you do? And he said, you should do whatever you would do if some of these folks that have been murdered were in your family. What would you do? Right? And I heard that. I was like, okay, wow. Like, of course, that would be a completely different experience, and I would be reacting in a completely different way. And so, that was his advice.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And yeah, I really do appreciate you sharing that. One of the other questions from yesterday was concerning our our population without shelter. And
Mhm.
so how is the city this is a question that's from Facebook. How is the
Sure.
city, or how can we collectively as a community, because we easily sometimes want to go, how's the city doing this? And don't look in the mirror and say, what can I do? But how is the city, and how are we taking care of our friends without a home?
Yeah. So, man, it is such a complex challenge, because on one level, every single person who is experiencing homelessness is an individual who is experiencing a unique set of challenges that have to be addressed on a very personal way, ultimately. So there's no one size fits all scenario.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, the city has done a lot, actually. And it often can feel like we haven't done anything, because the challenge continues, and because the visible unsheltered population, generally speaking, are folks that self-identify as not wanting to go to the homeless shelter or access other services. And unfortunately, we don't in the county have
It's hard.
a lot of spaces and places for folks that are still um, engaging in drug and alcohol behaviors, where they can be in the facility and be cared for, but still potentially use, where they might be able to transition. So that is a key missing piece that definitely needs to happen. And I think the county is working on that.
Yeah.
Um, so we've done a lot in the context of COVID. The county has, through funding through the state, provided housing in some of our hotels, especially for unsheltered folks that are COVID positive. Luckily, I checked yesterday, the shelter has not had one single positive test yet.
Mm.
So that is, to me, a miracle. I check in with the shelter director every week to get her list of things, and I usually share that out on social media of the basics that they're looking for. But ultimately, a budget is an expression of values, and the federal budget is an expression primarily of values in the military. Like, the vast majority of our budget, the federal budget, most of our tax dollars are going to that. And so regardless of how you feel about a particular scenario happening in our foreign policy world, still, when you really look at the budget, you can see that that's a choice. That's an expression of values there. And that, to me, is really a place where it starts. Like, I would hope for a budget that would actually value, helping people in this country and lifting those folks up, and providing those unique types of services and care opportunities, so that they can move out of homelessness and into lives, of meaning and value for themselves, which is not to imply that their lives don't have meaning or value, as they are.
Right.
Um, so, and yes, the community, I think, definitely does have a role as well. The shelter is always looking for volunteers. And there's all of, the donations and the volunteering, that's key. But also, these are huge systemic problems. And so it's going to need a systemic solution, which is going to involve politics, essentially. And it's also about voting, and voting for people that are going to prioritize issues like unsheltered folks in the budget process.
Yeah, and I know it's a complex um, problem to tackle, right? Because you're dealing also with, I've talked to you before about mental health and and working through mental health agencies to rehabilitate people and job opportunities and job creation, and it's a layered problem. So
Yeah, we just had to engage. There was a community of folks living down by the creek, and the situation was just really getting to be a huge situation. I think there was 40 tons of garbage. Also, we'd had several complaints about threats of violence as people were trying to use the Bob Jones Trail. And the impact on the quality of the creek water is massive.
yeah,
And that puts us in violation of a lot of laws. And so all these things are very complex.
yeah,
So we offered to get those folks back in the shelter or reunite them with their families. There are some help resistant folks because in the shelter, you cannot be actively using drugs or alcohol. So, for folks that are living with substance misuse issues, it's really hard
yeah.
for them to find a place.
Yeah, I'm glad. And I've noticed that about you specifically. You've posted needs for the Prado 40 Center, and continue to make those needs known, and we appreciate that, because I think so many people are saying, what can I tangibly do? I'm one person, and
Mm-hmm.
the problem seems so big. And I've heard it said, like, you can't do everything, but you can care for one. You can't
Mm-hmm.
you can't give an exorbitant amount of money, but maybe you can give some. You can't give all of your time, but maybe you can, and every little bit adds up. And so I appreciate you sharing that in this time.
Yeah, we expect, this won't come as a surprise, but homelessness is almost certain to grow exponentially out of this COVID
Yeah,
crisis. One of the things you could do when you have a church community is, maybe you do this already, is have a fund, because keeping people from entering homelessness is actually one of the most effective and important things to
yeah,
do.
that's huge. That's
Once
huge.
someone becomes homeless, it's much more difficult to house them again. So maybe you could even have a fund for, one person to access to help them with their rent for the next 6 months or something. Those kind of things could be really helpful too.
Yeah. We got a question, a live question. Okay.
Okay.
How is the city coordinating with Cal Poly regarding returning students in the fall from all over the state? And thank you for continuing to put out needs within the city on your social media. So,
Thanks. And thank you, community, for stepping up and meeting those needs. That's been really great. And, thank God for the people at the shelter for sticking to it and really helping folks there. So thank you for the supplies. So right now, it's not 100% clear as to what the fall is going to look like for Cal Poly. You've probably seen that update, that whole system is more or less going to be going virtual in the fall, the whole university system, not Cal Poly specifically. But Cal Poly is a little bit unique in that it's a real hands-on learning institution. And so I know that President Armstrong, I think, has been really discussing with, so it would be the chancellor, to figure out how, if, and when, how that might look for all, or maybe not all, but some students to return in the fall. So that's still a little bit up in the air. And there's huge impacts both ways. We see the student impact on our local economy as about $3 million a year, I believe, or to the city organization, actually, I think is where that number is coming from in my head. But nevertheless, it's a big impact on both the city organization specifically, but on the city of San Luis Obispo. And so that's a big concern, the lack of those students and the sort of further damage that will likely do, especially to some of our smaller businesses. In terms of the safety aspect of students returning, I think that's a real tough one, and something that I know that President Armstrong and his whole team are really looking at. Safety for their own students, so they're looking at how classrooms might be organized, but also safety for the community. I think that everything I've read so far, and again, a lot of this is just educated epidemiological guesstimates,
yeah.
but that the fall here in SLO we'll likely see, we're anticipating the possibility of a significant surge, more significant than we've seen so far. This is what happened in the pandemic of 1918.
Mhm.
There was a huge spike in the fall as well, much worse in the first wave. But especially here in SLO, there's a concern that we've had low infection rates, potentially, it looks like. And then we have two populations that move in and out of town, students and tourists. And so all of that could culminate in a rougher fall for us than most people might be anticipating. And then that puts the schools of all ages in a tough position, because it's hard to plan for fall when fall may in fact be a more difficult time than spring has been so far. So I don't know if that fully answers that
No,
person's question.
I think that's good. I think it's got to be so hard to live in possibility, right? Like there's data, and there's this could happen, and I think the decisions that are made, like I think grace is needed for all involved, and because these are decisions that people are having to make that they've never had to make before. I mean, you're in that situation. President Armstrong is in that situation. And regardless of your political affiliation, grace is needed. Like you spoke to earlier, civility is needed. Care for the human person is needed. I think we could all use that. And so we're praying for you and the city in some big decisions, because I know there's economic toll, and with economic decline comes emotional decline, and those problems just kind of snowball. And as a member of a collection of people, a church that desires to live the way of Jesus and see hope spread, we are also kind of racking our brains and praying about how can we best use our hands, our facility or lack thereof, to continue to do what we feel called to do. And I feel like, and I know you guys are in a similar boat. And so with that.
Are you planning on having church on Sunday?
No.
Okay.
No, and so that, that's something that we've wrestled with and prayed about of we don't want to make emotional decisions and rush back into thing. And the building is just a building, right? Like the people and the community are still together and remain committed to what's ahead of us. And we're going to stay focused on what's ahead of us. And so we don't want to rush back into something before the quote unquote dust settles. Let's take a pray and wait and make a wise decision kind of approach. We want to be for the city. Jeremiah, there's a verse in Jeremiah that says, seek the welfare of the city. There's a verse in Psalms that says, dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. And we feel like the faithful thing to do that seeks the welfare of the city is to wait. And that's kind of the position we've taken. That's not a judgment on anybody else, because I know there's different dynamics, but that's kind of where we're
I think that's probably smart. I mean, some of this gets a little anecdotal, so it's hard to know what the real data shows, but there's definitely been many cases of churches sort of overtly gathering, even when they weren't supposed to, in other states especially. And sure enough, massive, infection happening and people passing and all that sort of thing. And so it's a hard decision to make, but that you are allowed now. So
right. That, yeah, right. You don't want, whatever. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No,
yeah, I mean,
no, we are. And I think part of it is, we're looking at the document and thinking, what's wise for us. And for us, after prayer and seeking wisdom, talking to city officials, talking to other leaders within the community, other pastors, we've made that decision. And that, that's not a judgment on anybody else. I don't want to temperature scan people on their way in the door while saying everyone's welcome except beep, you gotta turn away. And so that's just kind of where I know I'm making light of that, but that's just kind of where we're at currently. I hope that in the next month or two, you know, we're praying that this whole thing goes away, right? Because this is not, we don't want this. You don't want this. You don't want pandemic. You don't want COVID-19. You don't want economic hardship for SLO or for your family or for anybody. We don't want that for any family here. So that's kind of where we're at.
I guess if and when you do come back, you might want to skip singing,
Yeah.
they're saying, which is
Yeah.
sad.
We'll just
But
hum.
yeah, there you go.
We whistle. Whistle. We got another question, if that's okay. Can we like rapid fire you here? All right. Let me see. In several larger areas like Silicon Valley, companies are in hiring freezes. How has the job market been impacted in the SLO area?
So lots of folks, of course, have lost their jobs. We have a lot of service industry jobs here. And so many or most of those went away or certainly were significantly reduced. So that has been massive. You might have read that, Mind Body let go of a lot of people also, with their business model.
Right.
They're supporting all those businesses of people meeting in person. And so they've taken a huge hit. And so there's definitely been some significant impacts. With remote working, though, a lot of you said Silicon Valley, and so that reminds me too that a lot of companies have moved to work from home as a potential permanent option for folks, and I do think that will likely have impacts on SLO. I think at first when this was happening, I was thinking, okay, well maybe one of the silver linings for people that are struggling to afford to live here is that maybe housing will go down on some level for folks. But I actually don't think that's going to happen. I think the reverse is going to be the case. I think with people being able to work from home and having fears about safety, why wouldn't they want to come to a beautiful place that's relatively geographically separated, is safe, and they can still work for Twitter here in SLO? So I'm curious to see how that goes.
Yeah.
But yes, we've definitely taken some major job losses. The city itself has let go, I think, of over about 200 people.
Mm. And
City organization.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a nonprofit, Melissa James is kind of heading up, I believe, Reach, that is working on economic development and rebound and trying to figure out what to do with, I'm speaking out of line here. I just went blank, but they're working hard on job creation for the region, not just SLO City, but the county, the region at large, with the closure of Diablo Canyon. There it is.
Yeah.
And
started that. Yeah, as kind of the main impetus for, okay, we need to really start thinking about how we're going to transition away from Diablo. Now that seems like very small potatoes compared to what's going on. And I'm just so grateful, actually. In many ways, I feel like the closure of Diablo is such a gift in that it inspired a whole regional way of thinking. And so it was Melissa, and I don't know if she's happens to be watching right now or not. And when she was at the chamber, and they organized this trip that a lot of us took to the Denver Boulder area, because that region has basically invented regionalism on some level. And so a lot of us went and we really learned a lot, and we got to know each other and came back with a real commitment to being really regionally minded. And that has served us so well in this new moment. So we're just ready. We're ready for this, as ready as you can be for the unexpected. We're really ready to work regionally. So, that means, like, for me as the mayor of SLO, I want all kinds of good stuff to be happening in Paso Robles too. And Reach is even, going into like way south to Vandenberg and all of that. So what's good for one is good for all. And that's sort of my general philosophy anyway. So I appreciate that approach that Melissa and Andrew and others are leading. And so it's been great to have that.
Do you think the rental, this is another question, do you think the rental market will be impacted similarly to the housing market?
So, man, all of this is going to be so interesting. We have vast majority renters in our community. I think it's about 63% are renters here. a lot of those folks that have lost their jobs, we have this eviction moratorium, but that does not include a rent freeze. So for the last 2 or 3 months, maybe you weren't able to pay your rent and you didn't get evicted. But I believe the end of May or the end of June, June's rent is due, I think.
Mhm.
I'd have to look at that. Um, but then all those months of rent are technically due still. So I don't know how that's going to work out for people.
So,
You know, I, I know a lot of people have been wanting a rent and mortgage moratorium to see if we can get through the next 6 months. But all of that is to say, I think the rental market is going to be really interesting,
yeah.
especially with Cal Poly maybe not coming back. So there's a lot of factors kind of happening with rents. I think it's impossible to predict. I have heard that rents have already started to go down. So I think in the short term, you'll probably see rents going down. In the long term, they also might be impacted by that desire for folks from the bigger cities to come here if they can work remotely anyway.
That's good. Thank you. Okay, one more question, and then I get to ask you a few of my own. Is that okay?
Okay, sure.
If you need to go do something, just let us know.
No, I'm here for it.
This is from Miss Bonnie. Slow took a bold stand during the 1918 flu epidemic to require mask use. Do you know how long the mask requirement lasted, and was it an effective measure?
That question feels like a Trivial Pursuit question.
I know it does. I'm like,
I don't know, and I love. I mean, it's a great question. I'll have to look that up, but I can say a couple things about masks. Is that that's another area that has become very controversial.
I was a part of my first mask. I witnessed a mask shame the other day. And it just was, I was praying for civility and grace for everyone involved. I witnessed it. I was not a part of it. I witnessed it happen, and I just wanted so badly to hug them and say, it's going to be okay. But I couldn't do that. I had to stay several feet away. So.
You know, I have so much compassion for all of the sides, so to speak. I totally get it. You know, like everybody's kind of coming from the same place, which is I'm afraid, and now I'm seeing you as a threat to my safety.
Yeah.
And whether that's like physical safety, so the people that are really adamant about masks, you know, there's a lot of data to suggest that they do increase safety for folks. There's some data to suggest that it may not, and it also can create maybe a false sense of security, et cetera. So there's data points kind of all over the map on that one a little bit, but I would say that it seems clear that it does create more safety for folks.
Yeah.
But you know, and then the other person is experiencing like, you are a direct threat to my freedom.
Yeah.
And this mask is just the beginning, or we've already had a lot of, frankly, totalitarian measures over the last 20 years. But anyway, this mask feels like the beginning of a real takeaway of my freedoms, which I think is a legitimate, like the concern about freedom and privacy, I think is warranted. You know, I'm not sure that the mask is where to put all that fear, but I get it. I get it. And you know, Americans just don't like to be told what to do. Basically, that's part of it too. Like we've got this real independent thread.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of data, or you know, some very anecdotal kind of studies about men in particular have issues with the mask. You know, it's not experienced as masculine. So, you know, there's a lot going on with all of that. And so I have advocated for masks at the county level and then also with my own city council, but there has not yet been the willingness to move forward an ordinance or what have you. Although there seems like there's a growing community movement around wanting masks. So we'll see where that goes.
And I appreciate you even saying, like, I appreciate your compassion for both sides. And I want to, I mean, you said you've noticed that people are seeing others as a threat. Like you are a threat to me, which kind of ties back to our conversation on race, right? Like we are now making an individual based on color of skin, or you look like me, you don't look like me, you believe like me, you don't believe like me, you're wearing this, you're not wearing this. I'm now making you a threat and I'm pointing at you and saying, you're the problem. And then we get back to the whole lack of civility, lack of grace, lack of love, all those things. So full circle, full
Yeah.
circle.
Yeah, I mean, the mask thing concerns me because and the whole conversation, I mean, it really feels like we're moving towards, and in many ways are already in a civil war of a type. And I've been listening to and talking to a lot of really deep thinkers that are genius minds, and they're seeing that too.
Mm-hmm.
People like in the climate change world, which is kind of where I come from, a lot of people are switching from their number one concern being climate crisis to their number one concern being division, because that is creating so many other negative ripple effects and is the most dangerous thing I think that's happening. And you see this manifesting in this mask thing, this shaming that you're referencing, just the rage and the complete inability to have a conversation across difference, you know. Few folks seem to be able or willing to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it's tough to, yeah, that's tough because you don't want to prescribe, a fix for that. But I do think compassion comes from somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
love for another person comes from somewhere. And I won't say, I believe that comes from a place.
Jesus, you can say it.
Yeah, I believe that comes from from
I'm
from
not
God,
Jesus.
from God displaying from God displaying His love for us. Like there's a verse that says, we know what love is because God first loved us, right? And so we God is love, and that's what, as a follower of Christ, like that's what I believe. And I believe like I can look at another person, no matter how vile or horrific they've been to me, and move and react with love and with forgiveness and with grace. Not because I like what they're doing or what I like the feeling that they're giving me, but that I can actually see the soul of, like, not see I can't see their soul, but I can see like the individual, and I can respond not to the behavior, but to the person, and to say, hey, I genuinely
Yeah.
think you are an image bearer, and you're a person. And so I had to throw that. I had to throw that in there. I had to throw that in.
I love it.
Okay.
I mean, and on a really deep level, I have the same point of view. I mean, I would say my language around it would be more like, I see that we're all connected, and I feel like there's universal consciousness is what I would probably say. And that, we're all literally come from the stars. Now, I don't know if you hold that view, but that's what the science around that is, like we're all literally made of stardust, and that's why I think this division is the thing that we really need to heal, because it's this illusion of separation that causes all of this pain, that I can see you as separate from me, and so I can otherize you and demonize you, like I could say, oh, white rich preacher man, like you're the man and you're responsible for
you were wrong on the rich. Although I think globally we are all way more rich than the whole world. So yes.
Okay, that looks like an expensive haircut, I guess.
I cut my own hair. I saved my 20. It used to be $20. Now it's like $35 to get a haircut. I cut my own hair. So.
You did a great job.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, we're all connected.
Yeah.
And even though sometimes I don't even want to accept that, especially when I see someone who's really, where I just feel like, I'm connected to everybody else, but not connected to that guy, because that guy's being terrible.
Yeah.
And I'm not connected to him, but of course I am. And so I think when you really start to name that and embody that knowing of that connection, it starts to become impossible to hate and demonize and otherize. And even I'm noticing like a growing discomfort with even, I don't know if gossip's the right word, but like even those little asides that you do, like, oh, well, he's da 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 da. Like you're trying to make a joke, but it's at the expense of somebody else. I'm noticing that it really doesn't feel good at all. Like that person is me, really, you know? And so that's really been helpful for me to really embrace that connection. And, you know, that's really what you're saying too. Like if we all come from, you know, the same source.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. I love that.
Oh, you're going to get me going to church pretty soon. You're going to make my mom really, really
Well,
happy.
hey, everyone's welcome. I've invited you. All right, I've invited you. Now, you know what? The city just shut down church though, and now you can't come. Or you can watch.
No. Okay.
um, I'm joking. That was said in jest. The city has not shut down church. The church is still the church. We all know this. And so I was going to ask you one more question. Okay. We've got a couple minutes. What can we be mindful of as individuals watching this, San Luis Obispans? What can we be mindful of, maybe as the church, or this is a rambling question. How can we encourage you, or how can we help the city? I know we've talked about homelessness. What would you encourage us to do maybe that would encourage you? Does that make sense?
Thank you. You know, this is reminding me of, I was actually at a retreat right before, a few days before lockdown. And so I had come down, I was in Big Sur for a couple of days and I didn't have good cell service. And I think I was coming down the mountain and I finally got into cell service and I checked my phone and I had a text from you, I think. And now I'm getting really emotional just thinking about it. And you said something like, I'm praying for you. And I read that text and I thought, oh my God, this is going to be really bad. You know? Oh my gosh, people are praying for me. Wow, I'm really going into a situation here. So it really was for me, a real physical almost transition from like coming down the mountaintop and transitioning into a situation. And your prayer was really like the first welcoming tone that I met coming down the mountain and into the COVID situation. So I appreciated that. And I think, you know, just doing the next right thing, which feels like very general and not very specific advice. And it is, that's true. I think sometimes we feel like we have to do something really big, you know? And honestly, it's those really small things that can make a big difference. So, you know, there's all these mutual aid organizations happening out there, Help Slow, there's one on Los Osos, and it's been beautiful to see community members filling in the gaps of what government or bigger organizations can't fill.
Yeah.
And it's been great. You know, I think one of my favorite things I saw it was on Easter, and I noticed a man had posted, I guess in the Help Slow group is where I noticed it. He said, you know, I'm all alone on Easter and I'm wondering if anybody has an Easter plate to share. And it just broke my heart. And I felt like, man, the courage that it takes to make that ask is so huge. And then immediately everybody wanted to help that person. Oh, I have tons of food. I'll come right over. You know, people that lived far away even from the guy, we're going to bring him some food and all of that. And I think those small things really help. So I think I would encourage people to, yes, the big systemic things we need to address, but as we're doing that, those small everyday things can be really helpful.
Yeah.
You know, like in terms of me specifically, even just kind words and a little note are super helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those small things are really, really big.
I think, you know, it's true of everybody, you know, like negativity is a really poor motivator, you know. It might motivate you for a season, but it takes a toll. And I think like words of affirmation and courage, you know, like they speak and they live with you. I mean, negative words live with me forever, right? But when you have a friend who says, you're doing a good job, you're doing a good job, you know, like I know that, you know, I think that's a big deal. And I think one of the things that we talk about often is being interruptible is is like allowing interruptions in your life to slow down and notice the person sitting outside of Lucy's Coffee who looks a little in despair. You know, maybe
Mhm, mhm.
it might make me feel weird to say, hey, how are you? Can I help with anything? But that gesture, you never know where that gesture leads to, where that actual care leads to. And I think being interruptible and slowing down, um, putting down our screens and being fully present and noticing these little nudges inside of us that when someone comes to mind, maybe sending them a note, especially in a season like this where there's fear and anxiety and separation, I think can go a long way to bringing hope into relationships and into, even if it's our mayor, right, who has no problems and who has it all together, right? Like to encourage you, because I know it's lonely at the top. And when you're in leadership, you're the easiest target. And you do need to know you have a group of people who are praying for you, and yeah, we're behind you. And so know that, we're praying for you and for your family. And,
Thank
uh,
you so much.
and as you continue to lead and navigate and with the city council, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of unknowns and uncertainties ahead. And we desperately want to all be in this together. I know there's a lot of division right now, and we've got a lot of work to overcome division, but we are desperate to be in this together, and
Mhm.
we're thankful for you.
Yeah, well, me too, you. Me too, you. And I appreciate the work that you're doing because honestly, too, we have so much healing to do as a community and as a country. And that healing really can't start until we heal ourselves. Individually, we have a lot of traumatized people that's a big word that a lot of people don't necessarily engage with, but there's a lot of things that happen on an individual level or systemically, and all those things. So people are experiencing a lot of trauma, and then they act from that
Yeah,
traumatized place even though they're not conscious of it, and they cause a lot of harm, myself included.
yeah,
And I notice, I can tell, like, oh, this is like the 7-year-old hurt little girl in me that's talking right now. And that's usually, she's not very skilled she's skilled in protecting herself, but she's not necessarily skilled in kindness and compassion.
yeah,
So personally, I'm trying to do that work too, so that I can show up and be my best self, so that I do notice that person sitting alone at Lucy's, and that I can really be, as you said, fully there and present for them.
yeah.
um, so we have a lot of work to do, and I appreciate the work that you and your is it called a parish?
No, it's okay.
What's it
Keep going.
called?
Keep trying. Keep trying. Uh,
What's it
I don't
called?
know, congregation or
Well,
group of
how do you know
people.
what if you do? Maybe it is a parish.
That could
It's
be
not a parish. Congregation. Okay, congregation. That's great.
parishioners. Yeah. We have what I love about our church is that they care about the city. Our church cares about people. We've seen a group of people rally around small businesses in this season, and I've just been so proud um, of what a tiny little church in San Luis Obispo that's barely 6 months old can do. When a group of people
Mhm.
comes together and rallies around hope, it's beautiful what can happen. And so
Yeah.
grateful to be here and grateful to know you. And yeah, hopefully this isn't the last time we get to chat.
Yeah. Anytime.
Okay. Well,
All right.
yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for
Bye.
following along on Facebook. And everybody's saying thanks so much. So thanks for being here.
Okay, great. All right.
See
Have a
ya.
good day, everybody. Stay well.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye.